Welcome to the latest installment of the 30-minute workout series. My name is Jeff Bartels, and I'm a civil infrastructure technical specialist here at Autodesk. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Jerry Bartels, Angel Espinosa, and Alan Gilbert. In today's session, we're going to be looking at how we can create label styles that we can apply to virtually any Civil 3D object. First, we're going to take care of a little bit of housekeeping. If you're unfamiliar with the 30-minute workout concept, this is a webinar series that we put together for the purpose of demonstrating tools and workflows not covered during traditional training courses. Our goal with this series is to help shorten the learning curve for many of these features so that folks can make the most of their Autodesk investment. We have a couple of ground rules with each session. You'll find that many times we show tools using an abstract example. We do that on purpose. This way we can focus solely on how a tool works. Once you understand how the tool works, you can apply it in whatever situation works best for you. Since we're only together for a half hour, our goal is to always start on time and end on time. Don't worry about taking notes. These sessions are always recorded. Anybody who is registered for the session will get access to the recording. If you have questions during the session, Jerry and Angel and Alan are going to be fielding those. Please put those in the Q&A pane. That's the most efficient way for them to find and respond to the questions. Likewise, if you'd like to schedule a follow-up one-on-one call regarding the topics that we cover, please put that in the Q&A pane as well. We always enjoy speaking with other users. As far as today's agenda is concerned, we're going to be looking at Civil 3D label styles. We're going to be starting completely from scratch, nothing pre-baked. We're not even using the default Civil 3D template. Everything we create, we're going to create before your eyes. We're going to walk through the anatomy of a label style. The nice thing about label styles in Civil 3D is that the same dialog box is used to create the label styles that apply to every Civil 3D object. So it's one of the few places in life where you can say, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. If we have enough time, we'll look at some practical examples, and I've got a ton of additional resources that I'm going to share at the end of the session. As always, this is going to be a PowerPoint-free zone. We're going to be working live in the application for the duration of our time together today. Okay, let me drop out of this. As you can see, I'm working in Civil 3D 2022.1. However, having said that, everything that we look at is going to be applicable regardless of the version of Civil 3D that you're using. I am working in a drawing that is completely devoid of content. There is virtually nothing in here. If I open the layer list, you can see that's empty. If I come over to the settings tab of the tool space, this is where all of the styles are stored. If I expand some of these categories, you can see that in every instance, the only style I have is the obligatory standard style. This is equivalent to starting with a blank AutoCAD file. Now, I did do a couple things. I have created a single scale so that we can create predictably sized text. And if we go to the Annotate tab here, I just want to show you that for the generic standard text style, I assigned that the Arial font so that we're not using the antique text.shx file for our labels. Okay, in the middle of the screen, I have got a point object. This will be the thing that we're labeling today. Once again, all the labels work the same way. So if you don't want to consider this to be a point, think of it as a storm manhole or a sanitary manhole or a back of curb location in a section view, something like that. It all works the same way. Since we're going to be labeling a point, let's say that we would like to label the northing and easting of this point. To do that, I'm going to come over to the settings tab. And over here on the tool space, we can see all the different objects that we can create in Civil 3D. I'm going to expand the point category, and from here we'll find label styles. Now you can see the obligatory standard style there. I'd like to create a brand new style from scratch. I'll do that by right-clicking on this header, and I'll choose New. This brings up the Label Style Composer. This is the dialog box with the 5 tabs that we use to create every label style in Civil 3D. On the Information tab, I can give this style a name. I'm going to call this Northing Easting. I can then enter an optional description. I can give myself credit for creating this style. When I'm finished, I'll jump over to the General tab. On the General tab, we assign the general properties of the label style. I can assign the text style I'd like to use. I can determine its visibility. I can choose the layer that I'd like to place the label on. Notice that we have a couple of behavior settings here. These typically come into play when we're labeling linear items like lines, arcs, splines, things like that. By default, orientation reference is set to object. That means that if I had a line that was drawn at a 45-degree angle, for instance, it would align the text to the object. If I open the menu, you can see there are some other options here. We could align the text to the view in which the label is displayed. We could also align the text to the world coordinate system. I'm going to stick with the default. But there's another option here called forced insertion. By default, this is set to none. That means that the label will be placed based on the settings that are applied on the other tabs. If I open this up, you can see that we could also force the label to be above or below an object. Once again, these two items apply to linear objects. Next, we'll come down to plan readability. Do you want the text to be upright or readable when it's displayed in a viewport or when it's displayed on your construction drawings? By default, that's set to true. Down below, you can see the readability bias. This is the angle at which the text is going to flip over. If I click and hold in the lower left corner of this preview, you can see that I can drag this text up to about 90 degrees. I can actually go beyond 90, so we could have this text be a little bit upside down if we want to. As soon as I drag this past the 110 degree mark, that's when the text flips over. Now, 110 degrees is a perfect setting for things like contour labels. In the event you have a bunch of contours that are running north-south, this will ensure that if you drag a label line across them, you won't have individual labels flipped over. Since I'm just placing text on an object, I'm not labeling contours, I'm going to set this to 90 degrees, and I'll press enter. When I do, if I drag this back, you can see that as soon as we break that 90-degree plane, the text flips. Let's look at one more thing, flip anchors with text. Notice how the text is justified in relation to the object that it's labeling. When flip anchors with text is set to false, the default, if I move this over, you can see that when the text flips, the justification remains the same. However, if I say flip anchors with text, when the text flips, the justification will flip as well. I'm going to keep this set to false for right now, the default. And then I'm going to reset my view. I love this preview over in the corner. This is a lot like having your own personal model space where you can test drive the label styles that you create. Uses the same properties. We've got the view cube. I can pan and zoom with my mouse wheel. Let's go to the layout tab. This is where we create the components that we use to build a label. Now, even though this is essentially a brand new label from scratch, it does have some components in here by default. One represents the point number, here's the point elevation, and here's the point description. If I open the component menu here, you can see right there, point number, elevation, description. There's the three components. Now, I'd like to create these from scratch, so let's get rid of the ones that we have here. I'm going to select description, and then I'll click the red X, and then I'll click it again, and click it again to delete those three existing components. Remember, we were going to be labeling this point with a northing and easting. So I'm going to start by creating a new text component. I'll click the button. This throws a generic piece of text on top of that object. And then I can give this component a name. I'm going to call it northing in this case. I would like this component to be visible. Next, we can talk about the anchor. What do I want to anchor this label to? Notice this says feature. It doesn't say point. That's because this dialog box is used for every Civil 3D object. So in this case, feature is the point. Let's zoom in a little bit. When it comes to the anchor point, if I open this up, you can see that we have several justifications. When it comes to a point object and that list, top left is right here. Here's top center, top right, middle left, middle center, middle right, bottom left, bottom center, bottom right. I would like to anchor my label to the middle right of this point object. So I'm going to choose that. Now there's one more step. When I come down to the text settings, here I can select my attachment point. What justification on my text do I want to match up to the middle right of my point? Well, I would like the middle left of the text to match up to the middle right of the point. That's the hardest part. Once you get that, everything else is easy from this point on. Now that I have the point positioned where I'd like it in relation to the object, I can then fine-tune my settings by adjusting the X and Y offsets. So I can move it left and right using a positive or negative X value, and I can move it up and down using a positive or negative Y value. I'd like to move it to the right 5/100ths. I'll set this to 0.05 and I'll press enter. You can see the change on screen. I can adjust some of these other like color properties or line weights if I want to. I can adjust the text height is right here. Note that the measurements that we have in this dialog box are the sizes that you want the objects to be on the printed sheet. We don't have to do any calculations or anything like that like we used to do in the old days. This scale will take care of everything for us. Whatever scale this text happens to be viewed at, it will be sized appropriately. All I have to do is say what size I want it to be on the printed sheet. So it makes it really easy. Let's take a look at the contents here. Currently, this is just a static piece of text. I'm going to click the ellipsis button. And in the text component editor, I'm going to highlight this and I'm just going to write text editor in here. If you've been around for a while, you'll notice that this particular editor looks a lot like the mText editor that we had about 20 years ago. It works the exact same way. When I click OK, you can see that's all I did was I just created a static piece of text. Let me click in the contents field again. I'll click the ellipsis button. Rather than having static text, I would like this text to be labeling a property associated with the point. So I'll select this and I'll press delete to get rid of it. And then if I open the properties menu, since I'm labeling a point, you can see all the point properties that I can label. I'm going to choose northing. Once you select a property, then you can adjust its formatting down below. I can choose the units if I want to change those. I can select a different precision if I like. I can choose how I'd like it to round or the character I'd like to use for the decimal. And you can see there's some other options here that you could experiment with. Once you select your desired formatting, you can click this arrow to push that over into the editor, and it creates kind of like a little programming code. In fact, it's a lot like an associative dimension. In AutoCAD, the associative dimensions have these similar carets. If I click OK, we can see kind of a generic representation of what that label might look like. Now, when people are looking at the plans, they may not recognize that this label represents a northing. Let's go back into contents. I'll click the ellipsis button. This is where the text editor comes in handy. I can just click in front of this programming code and I'll type n:\space and I'll click OK. So I can type anything I want before or after these labels. Let's make a change. Maybe 4 decimal space is a little bit too specific. I'll click the ellipsis button. If you'd like to change this programming code, you don't go in and manually try and change these values. All you have to do is click on it and it populates everything over here with the current settings. You can then make a change. I'll make this 2 decimal spaces, for instance, and then I'll click the arrow to overwrite the original. Let's click OK, and you can see the difference on screen. Now let's create another component to represent the easting. I'll come up and add a new text component. You can see that just dropped a piece of text in there. We'll call this easting. That's going to be visible. Now, where do I want to anchor it? I could anchor it to the same feature if I wanted to, or I could anchor it to the previous component. I'm going to do that. I'm going to anchor it to the northing. I would like to anchor it to the bottom left of the northing. So I'll choose bottom left. And then for the attachment, I would like to match up the top left of this label with the bottom left of the previous component. Perfect. Since this object is associated with this one, in the future, if I ever move this one, the other one will go along for the ride. Very powerful in that respect. Let's go to the contents area. I'll click the ellipsis button, and then we'll make this text meaningful. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to choose easting. We'll keep things consistent, 2 decimal spaces. I'll click the arrow to overwrite the original there, and then I'll type e:\space. Let's click OK. Now, as we look at this, I'm sure you'll agree if I was to add additional components here, that's going to start creeping farther and farther away from this point. Knowing that, let's flip back to the northern component, and all I have to do is change the anchor point on my object. Currently, it's the northing is attached to the middle right. Let's attach it to the top right of the point. When I do, you can see how it pulls the other label up as well. Let's click OK, and then we'll assign that label to the point that I have here on screen. I'll select the point in the properties palette. I'll go to point label style, and I'll choose northing easting. There we go. Let's create some copies of this now. I'm going to choose copy, and I'll select the point. We'll create a copy over here, and I'll create another one over here. Next, I'd like to edit this label style a little bit. To edit the style, I will come back over to the Settings tab, and I will double-click on the style name. This brings back up the label style composer. Let's look a little bit further down. We can see that there's some settings here with respect to border. Currently, the visibility of the border is set to false. I'm going to turn that on. When I do, notice where the border ends up. It's circling the current component. So the border wraps around whatever component is current. Now we have a rectangular border. We can also go with a rounded rectangle. We could put labels at the center of circles if we wanted to. I'm going to flip this back to rectangular. We can put on a background mask if we want to kind of knock out any line work or hatch that may be behind this label. I can change the gap, which is the distance between the text and the border. There's also some other general properties here we can assign. Now, what if I wanted the border to encompass both of these labels? Well, I can simply add the easting label to the northing component. Let's do that. I'm going to turn the border off for a second, and then we'll come up and we'll select that easting component. and I'm just going to delete it for right now. I will then take the northern component, and since this is going to represent the easting as well, I'm going to go ahead and rename this. We'll call it northern easting. Then we'll come down to the contents area, and I'll click the ellipsis button. Remember, this is just a text editor. I can simply click at the end of this line here and press enter and type E:space, and then I can choose the easting property. I would like that to 2 decimals, and we'll push that over. Now, if you choose to put multiple labels within a single component, by default, Symbol 3D sets the formatting to center justified. There is a format tab here. If I select that, you can see the justification is center. I'm going to set that to left to make those nicely left justified. As long as we're here, notice that if you wanted to, you could force a font on a label, you could force a color, you could turn on bold or italics or underline. If you're interested in grabbing Symbology, we can open the symbol menu here and you can grab some of the stock AutoCAD symbols. Or if I go to other, you can navigate through the different fonts that are on your machine and you can steal symbols. So if you're labeling things like the delta, for instance, you can jump in here and grab the delta symbol or any other custom symbology that you'd like to incorporate into a label. I'm going to click OK. And now that I've placed both of these within the same component, I am going to adjust their anchor again. I'm going to change the anchor from the top right to the middle right of the point, just to move those down. And then let's turn on the border. And I'm going to make this a rounded rectangle. Let's click apply. And we can see that change on screen. Let's zoom out. And I'd like to add another label to this point. Maybe I'd like to have a line coming straight up. And at the end of that line, I'd like to label the point elevation. This would be a label similar to what you might see when you're labeling a structure in a profile or when you're labeling a center line elevation in a section view, similar workflow. If we open the component list, you can see the components don't have to be text. I can create line components as well. If I click to add a line component, you can see it just throws a generic line in here. I can name this component. I'm going to call it vertical line. I'd like that to be visible. Now, the start point of this line, what do I want to anchor that to? Well, I'd like to anchor it to the feature. Currently, it's anchored to the top left, which is exactly what we see here. I'm going to anchor it to the middle center of that point, and you can see it jumps to that location. Notice that since we're dealing with a line, I could have an end anchor point as well. Now, I'm not going to use that in this case, but just for the sake of science, let's turn that on for a second. And it kind of makes it look like the line disappeared. It's actually drawing from the middle center of the point to the top left of the point. So it's kind of duplicating existing geometry. But just so you can see this, I can say I'd like to draw that to the northern easting. So it's drawing from the middle of the point to the top left of the northern easting. So you could use this to add some geometry to your labels. I'm not going to use the end point anchor here, so we'll turn that off. I would like to rotate this line. So I'll come down and change the angle to 90. And then maybe I'd like the length of this to be 0.25 or 1/4 of an inch. Remember, just the distance I wanted to measure on the printed sheet. And then maybe I'd like to push this up just a little bit. I'm going to change the Y offset here to 0.05. That looks good. Now let's put an elevation label at the end of this line. I'm going to go back and I'll create another text component. I'm going to call this elevation. It's going to be visible. I would like to anchor that to the vertical line. I'd like to anchor it to the end of the vertical line. And I would like to use the middle left of that text. I'd like to align that to the end of that line segment. Let's go to the contents and we'll add some value to this label. I will select it and then I will choose point elevation for my property. I would like this to 2 decimal spaces and I'll click the arrow to push that over. And then just so that people know what this is, I'm going to type EL equals, and I'll click OK. Let's click apply. And you can see the change on screen. Let's create one more label. Maybe I would like to have some type of a symbol, maybe a diamond. And I'd like to put the point number at the center. You might use Symbology if you're labeling things like structures. That's quite common, having different shapes. If I open the component list, notice that we can use blocks as components as well. This is probably one of the most powerful features that we have with respect to a label style, because now you can have drawing content participating in the label style. For right now, I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to create the symbol or the block that I'd like to use. I'm going to launch the polygon command, And then I'm going to press enter for a 4-sided polygon. We'll click on screen to set the center point. I'm going to say this is inscribed in a circle. And then I'll tap my F8 key to lock that on screen, and we'll pull this out. Now, how big should I make this block? Doesn't matter. The size of the symbol is determined within the label style. So if you have any existing symbology, you don't have to recreate it or rescale it. You can use it exactly as is. I'm going to set this to some arbitrary size here. And then I'm going to turn this into a block. I'll do that by typing block because I'm horribly old-fashioned. In the block dialog box, I am going to call this diamond. And then for my insertion point, I'll choose pick point. Now, what do I want to use? I'd like to use the center of this shape. So at the specify insertion base point, I'm going to type GCE, stands for geometric center. That's an object snap that's been in AutoCAD for a while, but hasn't quite made it into the Civil 3D interface just yet. If I type GCE, you can see I can hover near the edge of this polygon and I can grab the center. I can then select these objects and then I'll click OK. I have just defined a block called diamond in this drawing. Now I don't need this physical representation, so I'm going to delete that. And then we'll go back into our label style. I'm going to double click to edit. And then I will open the component list and we'll create a block component. I'm going to call this, we'll just call it point shape. And then we'll set that to true. Anchor component. I would like to anchor this to the point. I'd like to anchor it to the middle left of that point. So I'll choose middle left. For block name, let's click in this field and I'll click the ellipsis button. Since I don't have anything in this drawing, you can see I've just got one block there, diamond. I'll choose that. You can see that it's been placed. This is where I can assign the size or the height of that block. I can make this whatever I want. Since I'm going to be putting text in here, maybe I'll set this to be like 0.35 or something like that. That looks good. And then for the attachment, I would like to align the middle right of that block to the middle left of the point. And then maybe I'd like to push this over to the left just a little bit. So we'll use a negative number here, negative 0.05 for the X. Finally, let's create a point number. We'll put that to the center. I'm going to create another text component. We'll call this point number. Visibility true, anchor component. Let's anchor this to the point shape symbol. I would like it anchored at the middle center. And I would like the middle center of the label to be aligned to the middle center of the shape, which that's exactly what I have there. Don't worry if you can't get the exact snap location that you need. Remember, you can always fine-tune things using the X and Y offsets. For contents, I'm going to click the ellipsis button. I'll highlight this text, and point number happens to be the default. I'll just go ahead and push that over. Let's click OK. I'll click Apply, and you can see the change on screen. Now, before I jump out of this dialog box, let me mention there are a couple of other buttons up here. I can use this button to duplicate an existing component. So if you have to make one similar to an existing one, this can be faster than creating a new one from scratch. There's also a button here where you can adjust draw order. In the event you have things that are overlapping and you want to control the draw order of those items, we can click this button. Here you can see the components and you can determine which one is drawn on top of which of the others, if that's helpful. Fantastic. Let me click OK. So in this case, I've kind of created 3 label styles in one, just to show you some of the options that we have available. Let's talk for a second about dragged state. Every label that we create in Civil 3D can be dragged away from the object. If I select this point, for instance, there's a grip here that I can use to drag out the label. I'll click that and I'll tap F8 to unlock my ortho. And you can see that when this label gets pulled out, it creates stacked text. Notice that all of the accoutrements that we made, the border, the line, the block, all of those disappear. We're left with a single stacked list of these text labels. Also notice that the order in which that we see these is based on the order in which they were created. So if you have several components and you'd like to drag those out into a stacked list and you wanted the point number on top, then you'll need to make that point number component first. So keep that in mind. Let's talk a little bit more about dragged state. I'm going to hover over this grip and I'll choose Reset Label. And then I'll come back, we'll double click to bring back the text style editor here, or the label style composer. I'm going to jump to the dragged state tab. This is where we can adjust the properties of a label when it's in the dragged state. I can choose the arrowhead type I want to use. I can choose the size of the arrowhead. I can determine if I want the leader to be visible. Sometimes you just want to drag labels away from an object and you don't want a leader. You just want to be able to, position or orient the label in a different location. We can have a straight leader or a spline. There's some other general properties here. Display is stacked text, which is what we saw. Notice that you have a border visibility for the dragged state as well. I'm going to turn that on. Let's go with a rounded rectangle. And we can put a background mask on it. We can adjust the border and leader gap, text height. Really important, there is a text height on the dragged state as well. When I first started using Civil 3D, I was wondering why my text was getting bigger when I would drag it out. It's because there's a text height on the dragged state as well. Keep that in mind. Let's keep this as is. When I click OK, now when I drag this out, not only is it a stacked list, but it also has a nice rounded rectangle border around it. One more thing. I'm going to put this back. I'll just hover over the grip and choose Reset Label. Sometimes when folks set up a label and they go through the effort of creating symbology and line work and stuff like that, they would prefer that when you drag this label away, it remains in its current orientation. Essentially, don't touch anything. Leave it the way it is. We can do that as well. Under the display option here on the dragged state tab, I can change this from stacked text to as composed, and you can see the rest of this gets grayed out. That means that when you drag the label out, it is going to stay as composed. Let me click OK. I'll click the grip, and now you can see when I pull this out, it keeps the same composition as what it had. Now I can grab the end of this leader here, and I can drag this around if I want to. So that's a possibility as well. If you want to keep things as is, that's how we would do it. Let me hover over this grip and I'll choose Reset Label. I'm going to go back into the label style. And let's jump to the Summary tab here for a second. On the Summary tab, we can see a listing of all of the settings that have been applied in this label style. As I expand these one at a time, every setting that is on all the other tabs is available here. So the more you use this, the more acclimated you get to the tool. This can be a one-stop shop to change everything. There are some buttons here you can use to expand all the categories. If you want to expand all of them at one time, you can contract them all. Also note that as we expand these, there are some additional settings in here, things like overrides, child overrides, and locks. These, like locks, would apply to labels that are below this one. The concept is called child label styles. That'll have to be a topic for another day. In fact, I do have some additional resources that'll go through some of that. So there's some additional things that we can do in here, but for right now, this is a phenomenal tool for being able to review our settings and make adjustments to everything on one tab. Let's click OK, and we are dangerously close to the top of the hour here. Let's go to this drawing here called Practical. I don't think we have time to create a new label, but we do have time to edit one based on what we've seen. This drawing was created from the Civil 3D default template style. I've got an alignment here, and it's labeled using the default label set. If I zoom in, we can see the station labels, the ones that are applied, the major station labels every 100 feet. And these look great until we get to this last one. I know that this label's wrong. Why? Because there's a secondary label here at the end of the alignment that shows that that station's actually 9 plus 64.08. Why is this wrong? Because all of these labels are set to label to the even foot, which isn't going to be accurate for this last one. Let's look at how we can fix things. If I wanted to edit the style, if I know the name of the label style, I can go to the Settings tab. I can go to the Alignment category. This is going to be an alignment label style. It's going to be a station label. It's going to be a major station, and it's right here. It's the one that's got the little caret showing that it's in use. So if you know the name, you can take and navigate right to it. If you don't know the name of the style and you want to get in and make some changes, another option you have is you can select it. And if you right-click in the menu, many times there's an option here that says Edit Label Style. You can go right to it from the right-click menu. Now, this particular label is part of a set. So from here, I can still choose Edit Alignment Labels. What it does is it brings up the label set. Label sets are used to apply multiple label styles to a Civil 3D object at one time. That's all it is. You can see that the particular style that I selected is highlighted here. There's the style name. If I click right there, I can bring up the Pick Label Style box. Let me click Edit. And this takes me into the same 5 tabs that we've been using today. I'm going to go to Layout. Let's zoom in. I can see that the major station label is made up of 2 components, the station label and the tick. Tick happens to be a block. There's the block name. Let's go back to the label itself. I'm going to click in Contents, and I'll click the ellipsis button. Here's the programming code that's used to create that label. When I selected that, it populated everything over here, and right there we can see the precisions to the even foot. I'm going to set this to 2 decimal spaces. And then if I drag down a little further, we'll find a setting here that says drop decimal for whole numbers. I'm going to turn that on. And then I'll click the arrow to overwrite this original label. And when I click OK, then I can click OK to close up these dialog boxes. And you can see now that's labeled correctly. In a sense, every one of these is to the 100th, but because these fall at an even station, it's dropping those characters for the whole number. So that's a great way to get in there and make a change that affects just the one label that you're interested in. Okay, very close here. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. We talked about a lot of things today with respect to building label styles. I'm hoping that we laid some foundation that you can use to start creating label styles that you can apply to your Civil 3D objects. The concept of label styles is much larger than what we can accommodate in a half-an-hour session. For that reason, I have got a ton of resources that I've created that I've uploaded to YouTube. These are all videos that I've created. If you're interested, go ahead and hit the print screen button on your keyboard to take a picture of this screen. It'll go to your clipboard, and then you can paste this into Microsoft Word or Photoshop or something like that. So you'll have the image that you can use later. If you just jump on YouTube and do a search for these titles, you'll find videos that walk through how to create label styles that accommodate child styles or accommodate property set data, or you can create non-scaling Civil 3D labels, or you can improve the text display in the label style editor. Ton of content here, additional content that you can use to get into to review Civil 3D label styles. In the interest of time, let me say that if we have any questions that have gone unanswered at this point, we will get back to you with an answer. On behalf of Jerry Bartels, Angel Espinosa, and Alan Gilbert, let me say we thank you for coming. We really appreciate your time. We hope you find these sessions to be valuable, and we look forward to seeing you guys again in a couple of weeks. Thanks.